Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for giving up your lunch break to spend some time with us. And we just want to thank South by Southwest for having us here today. We're really excited about this panel. And there's so much that we want to talk about. And we also want to get to your questions. So at the very end, about 15, 20 minutes out, we'll take questions either from Slido. You can use your South by Southwest app, or go to slido.com and then plug in South by Southwest EDU. And we can also take some questions by microphone if anybody prefers to do that. So everybody's had their name introduced, but I would like for everybody here to give a small introduction, and I don't want them just to give their title and the names of their companies. I'd really like to start this out with what entrepreneurship is all about, and that is finding your vision, finding your passion, and then making it happen. So why don't you start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Xiaohoa Ching, and I'm the founder and CEO of Literator. And Literator started in my classroom. I was teaching second grade in Oakland, California. And I was in the classroom because I thought that if I was going to have an impact in the education space, I would have to do it through policy. And if I was going to be really good with policy, I would understand what was happening in the classroom. So I found myself teaching. And it was when I was faced with a classroom full of 7- and 8-year-olds who were all struggling with literacy that I realized policy was going to take way too long. The things that they needed, the things that I needed as a teacher were urgent, pressing problems that were also really practical. And I realized that ed tech could be a way to do that. And so I set out to do that. I found two amazing co-founders who were completely aligned to the vision of making something that would have an impact for students in really high-need, high-priority schools. And we've been doing that for 3 years, and that's me.
Okay, thank you. Evin?
Hey everyone, my name is Evin Floyd Robinson. I'm one of the co-founders of New York on Tech, and we are preparing the next generation of technology leaders. A little bit of background is that I started my career as a technologist, but most importantly, I was born and raised and currently live in New York City. And so when my co-founder and I, New York. So when my co-founder and I, Jessica Santana, who is fearless, started our careers in tech back home, we started to just think about, like, how can we give back? And so New York on Tech started purely as a passion project, and we started to read a lot of local economic reports that said, hey, there's a lack of local talent. And again, being natives of New York, we knew that there wasn't a lack of local talent, there was a lack of access and opportunities. And so with that said, New York on Tech started as a passion project, which we then evolved into an actual business. And we're now across all 5 boroughs in New York City, serving about 300 students now.
Hi everyone, my name is Logan Cohen. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Kudzu. It's a free mobile app that rewards students based on academic achievements. We were struck by the stat and sometimes negative stigma associated with millennials that were glued to our smartphones. We said, why not make this a tool of opportunity and have some mindful consumption instead of the mindless consumption. So we formed this mobile app, student-first technology, completely free for the kids, that they can get rewarded for good habits. Started out with an idea, got struck with the passion and traction, and now we have over 500,000 students, and we're in all 50 states.
Thank you, Logan. So this panel is basically called, like, how to be a successful entrepreneur as a millennial, but I want to add a few other layers to this conversation that are really important. So it's, yes, how to be an entrepreneur when you have no track record and you're young, but it's also very much about how to be an entrepreneur when you are a person of color. It's about how to be an entrepreneur while you are a female. It's about how to be an entrepreneur when you haven't gone to an Ivy League school. And it's about how to be an entrepreneur when you don't have a trust fund. So anyone belong to any of those categories? Want to raise your hand? Okay, so like this group of people here are proof that successful entrepreneurship does not belong to an isolated group of people. So let's delve first into the whole fundraising idea, right? Because that's what the backbone of this topic is. So you have this idea, you have this vision, you just outlined it for us. How do you take it from the vision into getting those resources that you need to accomplish those visions? And there's a menu of different things that everybody here has taken advantage of, and that is bootstrapping, that is competitions, that is joining an accelerator, and that is also raising venture capital money. So Xiaohoa, why don't you start and tell us about your path?
Sure. So when you mentioned the trust fund, one of the first things that I learned as we were getting started was that if I was going to be taken seriously as a leader and a founder, I would have to go full time. And when I reached out to people to ask how they went full time, I was met with lots of answers like, yeah, I have a trust fund, or I have a safety net, or I had a long-standing tech job, and now I'm using that to coast on. And that wasn't a reality for me. And for the last 3 years, what we've found is that we've actually just figured out how to bootstrap through the competitions, through lots of finding support, and actually generating revenue. Part of that building a sustainable business and having a really good financial model means that you can start making the money sooner. And so that's been the thing that we've chosen to do that has actually put us in a much better position, I feel like, to actually fundraise. We have the traction to prove it out, that we can actually make money. And we've done it our way, and that is very gratifying.
So you decided straight up, I don't want to do venture capital.
No, it was not just I think I'm in the Silicon Valley, and so the narrative around how you build a startup is very much like, go get VC funding as fast as you can and raise as much as you can, because that means that you're successful and people believe in you. The reality is, I was a founder of color coming out of the classroom, a woman of color, and my experience didn't match up with the privilege and pedigree that they were looking for, right? So it took a lot of filling knowledge gaps or building credibility before I could even approach those conversations. And what I found was, rather than spending all of my energy and time to do that, to convince them that this would be a worthwhile cause and that I was worth trusting, I would just prove it. And that was out of a necessity. I didn't really have the choice to just walk into those rooms.
So Evin and Logan, you chose different paths. You want to tell us about your choices?
Yeah, sure. So when you have the word first in front of a lot of actions, or things that's associated with your name, like first to go to college, first to work in tech, first to work in corporate America, you have to be very strategic about the way that you do things. And so when it came to starting New York on Tech, Jessica and I were always very strategic about the phases that we were going to go through in order to raise money. And so I'll give you an example. When we first started, we bootstrapped everything. We would take a couple of $100s out of our own pockets and rent space and do things like that. And then we started to have events. These events were mostly like friends and family that equaled to like thousands of dollars in that range. And then we started to go into early stage kind of accelerator programs, places like Camelback Ventures, 4.0 Schools, Civic Accelerator, who gave us grant money in order to kind of, launch our organization to the next stage. While in these incubators and accelerators, we started to think very strategically about our logic model and our theory of change so that we could then have data, which we can then take with us to foundations to raise even more money. And so it was very phased, right? Startup to kind of some early stage money to having the data that can support what you're saying that you're doing. And then now into a position now where we've raised over $1 million+ in money and in resources to support our organization. And so in the beginning, it's just having a plan in mind and then taking it phase by phase in order to reach the end goal.
I think what's really fascinating is that there's no cookie cutter method, and this panel is kind of embodying that. So with Kudzu, we were co-founded by two non-technical founders. Playing Monday morning quarterback, I might have brought on someone with a technical background, but that forced us to fundraise relatively early. But a lot of entrepreneurs make the mistake of, I can't get to the next level because I don't have funding. Money does not cure all. You actually have more responsibilities, have a clear source and use. These investors are trusting you with a piece of their livelihood. It could be going to a trust. Why are they giving it it to you. So something that we learned was when the student rewards program with Kudzu, we actually had alphanumeric codes kids print out just to prove the concept, because why allocate all of this money and fundraise to a technology that kids aren't going to use? So we did bring on early angel investors who believed in us, but they only believed in us because we believed in it, because we had that small sense of market validation.
So how did each of you, are you all first generation entrepreneurs, or were your parents entrepreneurs?
First gen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so none of you went to Stanford Business School, right? No. Okay, so how did you learn how to go about doing this fundraising? Was it through reading Forbes, for example, and reading stories about people so that you had role models? Was it through peers? Was it through trial and error? How did the light bulb go off, and how did you, in fact, figure out, like, this is something I could actually do, and this is the way to do it?
I think that there's a misconception or a story that's told a lot about how becoming a startup founder is one of the most, or being a founder generally, is really isolating and lonely. And I will say I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the fact that, for me, this is about community building. Everything that I've learned, everything that I understand, I've been able to find resources or people who are willing to support and go out of their way to either guide me through that process or be a sounding board. And so it was really just, reaching out to a community.
Do you have an example?
Yeah, sure. So actually, when I was in the classroom, I did Teach for America. And when I first started thinking, okay, maybe I actually have a startup now. Is this what I'm going to do? Is this actually a thing that I can make happen? I just went on LinkedIn and I looked for teachers or founders in the Bay Area who are in ed tech who had done Teach for America, and I used that as my in, and I asked them to get coffee with me. So one of the first big supporters was Dan Carroll at Clever. Shout out to Dan. He was very, very helpful to me in the early stages and has been a friend ever since. And it's things like that that keep me feeling like I'm not in this alone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, on my end, I would say while I didn't go to Harvard, I went to Syracuse University, and while I was on campus, I felt like I was at Harvard. And Syracuse has some of the most supportive alumni, hands down. And a lot of the organizations that we partner with from companies, a lot of the leadership are graduates of SU. And so somehow we get connected to someone from SU, so that connection there has always been a plus for us. So to take it a step back, a lot of things that we learned were on our own in the beginning. And so we spent hours and hours at the public library at Grand Army Plaza in Brooklyn. We spent hours and hours at the public library in the Brooklyn Heights area where my apartment was at the time, and just reading every nonprofit book that we could find, like how to start a board of directors, legal structures, the whole nine. And eventually realized that there was still a lot of information missing in those books. And so the next stage after educating yourself through the books was reaching out to people. And so finding other executive directors or CEOs of nonprofits and just sitting down with them and saying like, hey, this is the idea that we have in mind. This is what we're thinking so far. Any thoughts? And then from there, you realize the whole saying of like, your network is your net worth, right? And so a lot of this information came to us firsthand from people that were already working in the education and nonprofit space. So it was balanced between like self-learning and a lot of just like networking over coffee and dinner and getting information firsthand from them.
I think starting out, I learned entrepreneurship through osmosis. I just wasn't realizing that that was the case. My mother left like a 20-year plus practice to start her own. She's an audiologist. I have an older brother, and my father never treated us differently. I mean, if I wanted to go into business and he wanted to go into something else, there wasn't a this is for my son and this is for my daughter. So I was very fortunate in that aspect. But then when you started to begin your own company, I wouldn't want to hear my first pitch, but you have to be confident. But then entrepreneurship has this beautiful way of avoiding hubris. So you're humbled. I think one of the first questions I got was, what's your monthly burn? And I was like stuttering over it. That should be so automatic. So just believing that you can do it, being delusional enough that you're like, this is going to happen, but then also getting brought back down to earth and being humble to make it happen in hard work.
Okay, so so you all are founders of various ed tech businesses. How is ed tech different in terms of raising money? I know you guys you haven't founded lots of companies, but you must have some insight. Why is ed tech distinct from other kinds of entrepreneurial efforts, or how is it distinct?
I have this joke that I went into ed tech because it's where you get really rich and really famous, right? But that's so not the case, right? I think nobody goes into the education technology space because they feel like this is I hate when people use this, but the sexiest space to be in. But what's real is that there are real fundamental issues that could be solved through innovation, and that tech offers a lot of opportunities to solve those things. The problem is the space moves very slowly. So when you're thinking about fundraising, especially from venture capitalists, they're reporting to LPs who have returns that they're expecting at a much faster rate than what you're expecting in an impact space. And I think the misalignment of that causes a lot of tension, causes a lot of misunderstanding, and it changes the landscape of where you can get fundraising from, right? And I think that more than anything, it becomes a matter of making sure that your investors are aligned and understanding of how long it takes and what the space is actually thinking about. One thing that I also want to add too is that I think for a long time there was this sense of, the edtech space is pretty nascent itself, and I feel like for a while there was an excitement around the edtech space, what was cool, what was exciting. What is cool and exciting is very different from what is meaningful and going to make an impact. It's not necessarily always the same thing. And I think what we're seeing now is that the edtech ventures that are going to be sustainable are the things that are going to take longer to grow and build, but because of that have trouble, I think, raising in the traditional space of venture capital.
Evin and Logan, can you talk a little bit about the difference in ed tech between building a sustainable business model and a revenue-generating business model?
Yeah, definitely. So it's funny because when Logan and I first seen each other yesterday, the first thing that we talked about was fundraising. We're like, what are you up to? Like fundraising, and we both started laughing because Logan runs a for-profit and I run a non-for-profit. But you're always constantly fundraising, and so to talk about it from the lens of a non-for-profit, right? You can fundraise from both ends. And what I mean by that is traditionally when people are fundraising in the not-for-profit sector, they always think that it needs to be attached to something of the social good side. So yes, a lot of funding does come from the social good side and foundations and the impact that you're having on society. But on the other end, right, if you have a true business model or a platform or a service that can be scaled, you can also fundraise from what they would call seed stage accelerators that will invest in the business side of your non-for-profit, right? And so there's two different kind of fundraising pools that you can go after, the foundations and things like that, but also the organizations that are going to give you money looking for a return on investment, the same way that they will look for a return on investment in a for-profit.
Yeah, I think EdTech provides a unique opportunity to merge purpose and profit. Kudzu is unapologetically for profit, but we have a really strong mission. We do not charge our users, the students. However, we built out our monetization strategy on day one. That doesn't mean that it's set in stone. User feedback and performance, especially from the teachers and educators, have been vital to our growth. But we always had this clear, how are we going to make money? Because how are you going to keep the lights on in addition to fundraising?
Okay, so let's draw a picture of the first time that you walked into a room and you're trying to sell your enterprise. How do you ready yourself? Do you use numbers? Do you get yourself mentally psyched up? What'd you do? And tell us, briefly, the story of it and then what the upshot. Success or failure?
Are we talking about sales meetings? Or are we talking about fundraising?
You pick. As fundraising, probably better to stick to the topic.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll let you guys go first.
I tend to over-prepare, so especially after that one dinner meeting when I didn't know the monthly burn immediately.
No. Tell us about that one.
Really? Well, we were fortunate enough to get a meeting with a high net worth in New York City, and I was getting ready for this boardroom meeting, and he's like, no, Capital Grill. So I was like, okay, I can't afford this. Hopefully he's grabbing the check. So our team goes, and then they're asking us about our revenue model and how we're going to scale. And this was an idea. So when I say early, I think we had a landing page coming soon, write your email down. We're figuring out how to build this later. But we were transparent about it, that we were early stage. This was an idea that we had. And he said, well, what's your monthly burn? And my background's in finance. So I was like, yes. And I'm just like, and it felt like an eternity. And I said, oh, I so just dropped the ball here. And my co-founder is sitting next to me. I'm hoping he picks it up. And I said, you know, I'm not really sure right now. I'm sure a large percentage is discretionary, but can I get back to you about it? And actually in the follow-up email, he said, I was refreshed by the honesty, and he was our first money in. So it was helpful
So
just to keep
successful.
it real. Yeah,
all right.
humiliating but successful.
Okay, that happens.
So on my end, I'll be very honest. The first time that we were kind of pitching New York on Tech, it wasn't a success, right? From the side of getting funding right off the back. And I'll tell you why. A lot of times as a founder, you are full of passion, all right? And so you enter that room full of passion. Like, we're going to teach kids how to build apps, websites. We're going to give them internships. We're going to give them mentors. And the other person on the receiving side is like, whoa, like, what's going on? This is a lot of information. And so while it's important to be very passionate about your business, you have to know what the person on the other side of the table is looking to hear. And I'll use that example of a water bottle, right? Say I have a bottle of Fiji water, right? If I can go in a room with someone, I have to know which part of the bottle or the water are they most interested in. I'll give you an example. Some people may be interested in the quality of the water. What is the pH, the pH levels, the TD levels, does it have electrolytes or not? Some people want to know, what is the material of the water bottle? Is it recyclable? What is the carbon footprint? And so what I'm trying to say is there's this thing in front of you, but it's all these other different aspects. So you have to break it down. And when we've started to realize that we needed to break the information down and understand who we were speaking to, that's when we became successful in selling our product. So sometimes our organization. So sometimes we would go in and someone wanted to know purely about just the internship program that we have. We train kids for a year, and then we get them into internships at top companies before they even go off to college. Some people wanted to know more about the curriculum. What are the programming languages, things like that. Some people wanted to know about the model itself out of school time. And so you have this big package, but you have to understand which components of this package that you need to sell to the other person in that room with you in order to be successful. Don't overwhelm them is essentially what I'm trying to say.
You are really very good with the metaphors. I have to say. We're going to get to another one in a minute, okay?
I'm gonna add in.
Yeah, go. Oh, wait, you didn't even answer the question.
I'm
You
gonna
dodged it. Okay.
I didn't dodge it.
Okay.
I'm going to answer it now. I will say there's two things that have stuck with me, I think, from the very beginning and still, persist in every single room that I go in where I feel like I'm pitching. And that is confidence is something you can conjure up. Confidence is something that you can amp yourself up to and do lots of hype music or whatever. But clarity is going to give you exactly what you need to convey really clearly how other people can have confidence in you. And so early on when I was pitching, I had the clarity of this is the problem I'm solving. There are kids in classrooms all over the country, around the world, who are struggling at all different levels and teachers who are struggling to meet their needs. And I knew that because it was my problem. That gave me the clarity early on. As I move forward, right, to this point where I'm now getting ready to fundraise, I have the clarity of what our needs are. I have a very, very clear story of what our milestones are that we're trying to accomplish and how we're going to do it. And alongside that, there's this other idea of, alternatively to this Fiji bottle metaphor, is the idea that you don't code switch. I heard this really early on when I started, and as someone who had grown up in the inner city and has a very strong identity as a woman of color, I think there's a way in which I've learned to garner lots of social capital and make my way into other rooms by figuring out how to assimilate and fit in. What I've realized now is that as I find myself on stages like this or in boardrooms, right, I see it as a privilege and opportunity to bring me and my whole self all the time in its full authenticity as much as I can. And that serves me in the long run. It serves me in the immediate moment of feeling comfortable and confident, but also having clarity. I don't have to posture myself in any other kind of way or tailor things unless, in a way to be really specific.
Okay, so let's talk about code switching.
Let's talk about code switching.
Let's talk about it. Okay, so so maybe we could talk about chickens now.
Yeah.
Maybe. Okay, so you are all founders of color, and two of you are female founders. Let's throw out some stats for a second here. 79% of all startups, this is 2017, were all male founders. 2.2% of startups were female founded, and that's 58 billion compared to 1.5 billion in funding. 19% were mixed. 83% of startups are all white founders. 15% minority, and of that minority, 1% is black. So you look different than the people you are asking money from, right? Generally, or maybe not, I don't know. So tell me a little bit about, like, you're walking into these rooms, do you have to read vibes? Did you feel in the beginning like you needed to sort of code switch? And did you even feel like you had struggles with like feeling like you deserved to be in the room? Evin, you're looking at me?
So I'll be honest, and I'll try to be transparent. In the beginning, I did feel like I needed to code switch, but I think it was because that's what people told me. They say like, oh, you have to be a certain way. However, through my own journey and exploring, I realized that you will become most successful when you stay yourself. What I mean by that, and Caroline hinted at the chicken reference, we were having dinner yesterday and I made kind of a comparison. So for example, when it comes to food, majority of us usually eat the same thing. We have a piece of protein, a chicken, some grains, rice, some vegetables. And so if someone is bringing the dish to the table, in front of you, you see a piece of curry chicken. And you say, okay, I'm eating this curry chicken. And then midway into dinner, this piece of curry chicken turns into jerk chicken. What just happened? You code switched, right? And for some reason, someone now says, like, whoa, what just happened? Like, this isn't the same chicken that I was eating before. And so when you're coming into a room, you always want to be yourself, because you never want to be put into a position where later down the line, someone doesn't recognize you because you have changed into who you really are. And what I mean by that is that it's okay to adjust. And adjusting goes down to the way that the chicken is prepared. Is it fried? Is it sauteed? Is it broiled? Is it baked?
Is everyone hungry now?
Right?
And it's lunchtime too, so thank you.
And so, what I would say is that I've realized that in order to be successful, come in the room being who you are, speaking your native tone of voice, carry yourself as you would, and then eventually the people that you are supposed to connect with and the people that you are supposed to build relationships with, that organically will happen. Do not force anything to happen because it is fake. And eventually fake breaks. And so that would be, my thought process there.
Great.
I think it's important to emphasize too that entrepreneurship is hard, fundraising is hard, and there's obviously extra obstacles for minorities and female entrepreneurs. So to recognize it and have the conversation is amazing that we have this environment now. With my experience, one of my first meetings that I was over-prepared for, I walked in and they said, oh no, we're waiting for the CEO, Logan, and I have an androgynous name, and I was like, I'm Logan, I'm the CEO. And you just saw them kind of sink back and like in disappointment that I wasn't worth their time. And I quickly thought about advice that I got from my father, who's Jewish, but he married outside of the religion, and he actually got teased about it at his accounting firm when he was there by a Jewish coworker. And then finally he turned to him and said, who's doing more for Judaism? You who goes back to the Jewish ghetto, or me who goes out and meets people of different walks of life representing what Judaism means and hopefully making them proud or say, oh, it was so nice to meet this individual. So whatever perspective you come from, that always stuck with me to say, okay, instead of being self-conscious about being the only woman in the room or the only 20-something in the room, why not be that liaison and spearhead and say, oh, okay, yeah, I met a female CEO. I judged way too early, and I was actually kind of impressed. So I have that welcomed pressure to represent and lead the future, hopefully.
So there's a lot of discussion in the press and in certain startup circles, certain startup locations, like in the Valley, that lots of attention now is being made on correcting some of the stats that I just read out, and that this is the age for female founders and founders of color. And I want to ask you, is that talk What's the talk and action? What do you see?
It's nice to hear. That's how it feels. It's like, oh, that's nice that people are thinking about it, but it feels very different to be in the space walking that walk and still having to do the extra work of establishing credibility. I mean, the reality is, and Logan brought this up at dinner yesterday, the fact that as women, we get asked questions about our traction and how much, like basically getting rid of the risk for someone else. And then men are asked questions about growth and potential. And that happens disproportionately, almost always. And it still happens. It happens constantly, right? And you just have to prepare for that. I think the reality is, as much as that is a nice way of thinking about how the movement is going forward, we're actively doing that work right now, right? We are setting the tone and proving out that it's possible, but that's a part of a harder journey than it, I think is made out to be right now.
So do you feel like you're towing the rope?
I definitely feel like I'm towing the rope as I'm moving forward, but behind other amazing women, I think, and women of color especially, who there are so many stories like Logan's that you can hear for so long before you realize you just have to be ready for it.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that despite the numbers, like minorities are out here building, right? And I have a lot of friends who are people of color or women, and they're constantly just building and building and building and building and building and building and grinding. However, when it comes down to that, is that you'll realize from the articles and things that are out there that there are some organizations that are true to what they're saying, right? They're making the investments and they're supporting people of color and women. But on the other side, you have some organizations that it's purely just marketing for them, right? It's another opportunity for them to get clicks and reshares and hold conferences that they can attract marketing dollars, but the actual work is not being done. Again, going back to what I was saying earlier, it falls down to you just aligning yourself with the correct people. And when you're in this space and you're out networking and you're meeting people, you'll eventually see, who is mission aligned and who actually gets what you're trying to do. And when you find those individuals that are supporting what you're trying to do, you work with them. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I've experienced and see from conversations with my friends in the space.
So what you're saying is that you are looking for and aligning yourself with and trying to connect with people who don't view what you're doing, even though you're a nonprofit, some of us are for-profit, is not a philanthropic investment. It's not just, it's not to feel good and do good and like click that box, but it's actually, you're seeking common ground with them. You're explaining that this is a business proposition. Can you talk a little bit about like how do you navigate that tightrope?
Yeah, I think it all connects back to, again, earlier. When you're going into the conversations, everyone is interested in something different. Again, some people are looking for the scale. Are you reaching thousands of students? Some people are looking for the impact. Is this short term? Is this a deep impact model? And so it's just being very clear about where you are as an organization and not adjusting your model just to fit a certain mold, right? I remember, and I'll give a real life example. I remember when we first came to market, we trained kids for a year before they exit our program. Organizations would say, why would I invest in you and you're serving a few hundred students if I can't invest in this organization over here and they're serving hundreds and hundreds of thousands of students? And then I would have to put it back on across the table, like we understand the scale aspect of it, but let's talk about the outcomes and the impact, right? If a student, is only getting inspired for a short few weeks, what is next? What actually has changed in their life? Like what skills do they actually have that they can now take into the college room with them or into job industries? And so these were conversations that I had to be comfortable with having with other individuals and not being afraid. I think sometimes, and I'll connect this to earlier, is like when you're fundraising, some people will do whatever just to attract the money. You have to have values and principles and know what you're willing to adjust on and know what you're willing not to adjust on, not to compromise your brand, but most importantly, not to compromise the lives of the students that you're impacting. Right. And these were all the things that we've learned over the years, right? being comfortable with speaking about what we're doing, putting it back out there to see if they understand now what we're saying, and if not, be okay with leaving the room, but leave the room the right way, right? You leave with respect. This can now be a potential introduction to someone else in this space, but knowing, again, are you mission aligned? It goes back to it.
I think it's also really important to note that you're vetting the investor as much as they're vetting you.
Yep.
Like they're the phone call you have to pick up. So again, is your mission aligned? Do you understand? You also want like different points of view. You want to build. You want to make sure that there's some constructive criticism there. But like Evin said, some people just change their whole business model to appease this one pitch. And that's just toxic for the long run. So please make sure that you are choosy with your cap table for as long as you think that this venture is going to be alive. You have a relationship with that individual.
Can I just add to that? I just feel like all of that is goes back to this idea that like if you have a really strong sense and clarity of your North Star, your vision for impact and how you're going to make that, that becomes consistent. You don't have to worry about wavering away from that. And also if you're maintaining this authenticity, you're not code switching every single time you walk into a room. What you're doing is you're establishing a relationship with you and the other person that's real, that won't change. Like you said, it's not going to turn into jerk chicken halfway through. But like Logan says, you're also vetting the investors. If I sit down at a table and they're not responding to the way that I am, if I'm bringing my all, if I'm being 100%, that is not the right person to work with, right? And I think that's really important. I think part of the logic around bootstrapping too, it's given us a lot of, I think we're sitting on a side of privilege. You always have to think about the fact that it is a privilege for an investor to get to join in on your enterprise or your venture. You are doing the exciting work. You are paving the way in whatever pioneering way that you want to do it. You have the vision and the energy that you're willing to put. And they need to be excited about that, and they need to believe in you, right? Just as much as you want them, they need to really want you. And so it has to be a relationship that's built on that kind of trust. But it really helps to have the credibility, right? So if you have clarity and you're grinding on that, then you're going to have the traction or the story to prove out that what you're doing is worthwhile, and you'll attract the right people.
So I wanted to pick up something that you just said, Logan, and that is when they call, you pick up the phone, right? So all three of these individuals on the panel were on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list, which you would be surprised how many people, when they're applying, say, I'm 31, can I be on the list? No, they're all under 30, they're all young people. So, you know, one thing I brought up at dinner yesterday that is concerning to me as someone who works on this list is, so being a founder, being involved in a startup is pretty all-consuming. And I just wonder, how do you sort of find balance in your life? And the question I posed yesterday, which I thought was maybe a little bit too forward, but I didn't think you minded, was, are you depriving yourselves of your youth?
My immediate gut reaction, I was like, no, that's not it at all. The reality is, I feel the most free in my life because of the fact that every day I'm waking up and I'm doing something that I really truly believe in, that I choose to do. And I also get to make choices on how I maintain those boundaries. I think one thing that I've learned as going from educator, like being in the classroom where you have no boundaries. It's the same thing as like being a startup founder in that you are always working. It never stops. The difference is when you're a startup founder, there's a lot less, I think, accountability to all these bodies in front of you. And so all of a sudden you have this freedom of agency of your time and your commitment and your priorities. And I think one thing I've had to really learn, and one thing that I truly value and I'm constantly working on is how to take care of myself, how to have really good boundaries. And that has been part of why this feels so freeing. That being said, I feel like Logan touched on this yesterday. I feel like we're always working, but we don't realize it because we're just so in love with what we're doing. So it sounds cliche, but it's true. I could do it all the time.
Yeah, to build on the cliche, you definitely have to love it, but I think that it comes with a really strong footnote. I love the purpose of it because it's bigger than yourself. Do I love what I do? Of course. However, do I love the tedious tasks like checking for that error in the code or all of these like CSV file uploads. Yes, we still use CSVs. I don't love that, but so many people are told, I always laugh at Professor Scott Galloway from NYU said the people who said follow your passion are usually already rich. And I just find that to be so true. Everyone's like, follow your passion. When I'm sitting there when I was in college, like, what does that mean? Everyone's nodding. And of course, like, I'm passionate about what I do, but I wasn't aware that this was the route of passion I was going to go in until I found an idea that I was struck by. Curiosity was there. Traction was there. You find your strengths, and then you become passionate about it. And I don't think that there's enough of an emphasis on that whole process so that young people and first-time entrepreneurs feel like they're missing out or somehow lacking, when in actuality, you have strengths, you're just not aware of it yet.
So I would say, like, first, my co-founder Jessica Santana and I, we have insane work ethics. And so, like, we're always working. And so one will say, hey, are you missing out on your youth, or is this impacting your youth? I would say you have to ask yourself, you know, what does happiness look like to you, right? It's an individualized question. When I think about happiness, for me personally, it was, one, building a business, but two, most importantly, creating something that was a lot bigger than myself. And that's the platform that New York on Tech has given us, right? Outside of impacting students and, you know, seeing the change in their lives, from a business standpoint, I'm doing exactly what I want to do, right? I get to fundraise, I get to build an organization, learn about every aspect of that organization, from legal to operations, everything, to the whole nuts and bolts, right? And you have to also understand that while your friends that are not building organizations are out there having drinks and partying, like, every happy hour isn't happy, right? And so it's okay to miss a happy hour, right? Like, some happy hours that you go to are gonna be fun. But then, like Logan said yesterday, there's no happy hours that you go to where your friends are venting. I'm not happy with my job. I want to raise. I want to be able to live in my own apartment, but the rent is too high, so I have to split with someone, right? These conversations that are going on. So again, to go back to the point, you have to understand, what does happiness look like to you? Because sometimes when I'm out, in the back of my head, I'd rather be working. But then there's times when I'm out and I'm having a good time. And if it's ever the moment when I'm out and I'm thinking about working, I know the next day, if someone invites me out, it's not meant for me to go out, right? And so again, it's you understanding your own kind of internal tics and needs, right? And following those.
I think we'd be remiss, too, to add in the narrative. Like, this is all very inspirational. It's like, oh, yeah, the hustle is like, you know, it's worth it because it makes you feel good. But, like, the reality is I haven't taken a salary in 2 years, right? And I think, like, you make a lot of choices and compromises to decide that this is what you want to do. I have a lot of, you know, I get this, like, question all the time, like, how are things going? And in my mind, I'm like, well, I'm full of gratitude, and I have a lot of freedom, so all of those things make me feel very joyful and happy. But, like, how's money, you know, is kind of like an underlying, how are you surviving is a question that I used to ask other founders all the time, and I think is a real question. And you have to figure a lot of shortcuts, and you have to make a lot of sacrifices. I think people call it, you know, like the ramen startups. So even if you're not eating ramen all the time, you're doing things like that. And that is the reality. Like, and I think it takes knowing that what you do and what you're trying to build or create is important and meaningful, yes, but that you are not your venture, right? That you are still your own person, and that you have to take care of yourself as best as you can, while still committing to trying to build something. But it takes that balance to make those sacrifices. I think I find a lot of times people who burn out really fast are the people who think, my startup is my life, I have an intense work ethic, and I never stop breathing, eating, working my startup, and they have no boundaries around it, and they also aren't taking care of themselves. That's like the fastest way, I think, to burnout and failure.
So you've witnessed that, and you say, "That's not for me."
Yeah, I saw it so
or have
early.
have you done it and you're like, I need to reel it back in?
It's exactly that. It was when I was first deciding to go full time. I had to really think about, you know, I'd struggled with anxiety a lot, and I knew that I was going to be going into something that would create a lot of stress externally, a lot of pressure, and I was like, I'm already doing that to myself. how am I going to survive in a space that is demanding that on me? And so it took a lot of like real critical thinking around my own ability to maintain that kind of sense of self-care and sense of, you know, if this fails, you're not a failure. If this is successful, fantastic. Let's keep trying on that route of things, but give yourself the choice. Nobody is ever like, nobody is forcing us to do the ventures that we're doing. Nobody is saying that if you don't wake up tomorrow and make this work, right? Well, there are investors that care, but nobody's going to say that like you're over and you're done in this world, right? We all still have value. And I think holding on to that and knowing that is deeply, deeply important in the midst of all of the really hard decisions that you will have to make this happen.
I was actually on the verge of that. I was guilty of when someone would say, hi, so tell me about yourself. I'd say, Kudzu's a free mobile app that rewards. And say, no, Logan, like tell me about you. And I'd almost be stumped at that question because what's outside of Kudzu? And I used to wear like being busy as a badge of honor when in actuality it's a result of poor time management. Like someone busier than you is not talking about being busy. So how are you going to grow and thrive and be selective with how you're spending your time? And I wish I knew that in hindsight, but I had to go through this mind shift of it's not cool to only define yourself through your venture, and you actually have more productivity in your venture when you allocate the time directly to it.
In the spirit of the Millennial, you know, panel, I will say that like I feel like as a founder, I am Zen AF. Like that is my sense of being in the world, and it's possible is what I'm trying to express. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so let's do some questions. So I will ask the top question here. Oh, you guys can't say it. And then if there's anybody who wants to do one question on the microphone, that's fine. But ask a question, don't like make a speech. Can you give us a sense of your timeline, revenue achievements to date? Oh, that's kind of complicated. We only have 13 minutes left. I'm sorry, number 3. You got 3 votes. Let's do this.
I think.
Your all-in approach is so true. For someone who just quit their job to go all in, how do you speak to creating partnerships to get that traction?
Can I answer first? Well, just to say that like when you're talking about partnerships, I imagine that you're thinking about like the traction, like your pilots or whatever. Know right away what the gaps in your knowledge and your expertise are. The most important partnerships you'll have are the team that you're going to be working with. Do not try to do this all on your own, and make sure that those partnerships are the right partnerships. That they are going to be the ones that scale and have the expertise that you're going to need in the long run. And do not settle for what you can get a hold of. My co-founder is an ex-Apple designer. She helped design Safari, and she's an engineer. This is like a unicorn in Silicon Valley. She was the dream of what I could hope for as a co-founder, and I didn't choose, you know, the first people that I could have worked with, who actually, I didn't get to share this story, but like I had a team, and one of the engineers was like, hey, you know, we're supposed to care about like educational equity, and put equity in air quotes. My jaw dropped, and I was like, I'm not working with you. And that was a decision that I had to make, and I walked away from a team that could have built an MVP and helped me get some partnerships that could, give me some traction, but I'm so glad I didn't. And so don't settle, and look for those partnerships that are the team that is going to help you bring this to life.
Okay, let's go for a mic question.
All right, what I thought of this. Chris Montero from UNC Wilmington. So I hope that I echo a lot of people in the room who have a brilliant idea, and you're thinking of competitive advantages and all these things, but what always gets in the way, in my personal experience, is time. And you kind of alluded to it somewhat, but for those, like all of us, who have like real jobs, and some of the people in this room probably have 2 or 3 jobs, creating a startup, I mean, I feel like my biggest hurdle is honestly finding the time. Like
Okay.
I'm exhausted.
Evan,
So
you
yeah.
were working. How did you do it?
So yeah,
Thank you.
it's a great question. So you have to, again, I'm a super planner, right? If you are working, you have to lay out a map for yourself. So for example, it's okay to have like a hobby on the side, right? Or just have an idea on the side. But eventually, that idea starts to become big enough where you can take it full time. And it's understanding the timeline and kind of feeling internally when it is time to pivot. Particularly for us, when we started New York on Tech, we were working, right? And again, it was a passion project, and Jessica left first before me. And so it was all kind of in a phased approach of like, okay, here's an idea. Okay, this idea is getting bigger. It's getting bigger. Okay, I can't manage both. Now it's time for me to leave. So it's the schedule part. Also, from the other side, it's the financial part of it as well. If you're first in a lot of those categories in your family, you have to think about the financial impact that it's going to have on your life and your family's life. And so in the back of my head, because I always knew I wanted to start a business, I've always been planning financially for an exit, right? And again, we talked about this where Jessica and I just literally sat down. We created financial spreadsheets. This is how much I make per month. This is how much you make per month. This is our spending. This is how much we can actually save. And again, it's putting yourself on a timeline or a schedule or mapping things out so that it doesn't overwhelm you, right? Things feel overwhelming the most when you don't have a plan in mind. So I would say that's the biggest thing. You're always gonna feel overwhelmed because there's tons of things to do, but you feel less overwhelmed when you can kind of get a bird's eye view of like what's going on. And so to give you some tips, it would be to kind of plan it out and personally inside of yourself, internally, start to get to a point where you tell yourself, is it time for me to do this full time or not, right? I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Hey, Logan, here's a question I think might be interesting for you. At which point do you step back into a management role and less hands-on with your biz?
Ooh. I think one of the most exciting aspects of entrepreneurship and your venture is that it's always growing. If there's some kind of like, if you're comfortable and there's some stagnation, there's probably something wrong. So I have an incredible co-founder, and he was the idea behind rewards for grades. But you also want to step back and say, in 6 months, in 12 months, what does success look like in the company? And then also, what role are you playing to help us get there? And if your team members can't answer that, you pull it back from the personal standpoint and start to reevaluate roles and who's going to be there. So personally, I don't think that there's, again, a cookie cutter method to step back into a management role. I don't know if that's ever your ideal goal, but make sure that you have clear value adds and complementary skills of your team members and be transparent about it. Again, it's not personal. Some people are A to B, some people are A to Z for the whole alphabet, but the hardest are the A to M's because you have to have that tough conversation, but it's for the best interest in the company.
So you actually had to do that, didn't you? I mean, your co-founder is no longer with the company.
Yeah, so he's on an advisory board. Yeah. So, and then everyone's like, ooh, is that okay? Because we've watched way too many startup movies. And you're like, yeah, it was actually fantastic. Like, he's out in LA, going to go into venture capital. And I'm continuing to build this company out. But it took a real conversation. We were able to bring on a tech lead with the equity that it freed up. So our investors benefit, our company benefits. So have those tough conversations, because when it's too late, that's when you get the movie.
Okay. Next question.
Hi, Audrey Archer, living and loving in Austin. And I really appreciated the comment of not confusing yourself with your business. And I'm curious to know, when you say if you fail, or if your business fails, it does not mean that you fail. So what is your measure of success, or all three of you? How do you measure your success outside of your business?
Oprah, please tell us.
Okay, I used to use this analogy of being in a startup as walking on a tightrope. And it's a very precarious situation, but every step you take, you are still making it. You are still surviving. And if you keep looking down and thinking about all of the threats or the mistakes or the things that have fallen off, you're gonna end up falling. If you're looking forward and you're thinking, every single step that I take is a step further and I'm learning from it, I think that's what success is. I think more than anything, all of the experience that I'm getting, every single decision, I think every single question I can't answer is an exciting thing for me, because it means that I have room for growth. I think if you had told me when I was an art major in undergrad that I'd be working on financial projections and really enjoying it, I would have laughed. But I think that's the thing. You get to learn how. You get to broaden your horizon of what is potential for you and what is success for you and what is possible for you. And you can only do that if you have opportunities to push yourself. So I would say success is this opportunity, the privilege of being able to survive every single day, but not in survival mode, in a thriving mindset.
I was going to ask her, so we're basing success on the personal side, correct? I didn't. Okay, let's push aside. Yeah. So in the beginning,
It's the water in the bottle, not the bottle.
got it. So, right now, the way that I best, base my success right now is on freedom. And to be honest with you, before when I was younger, it was based financially, like how much money that I have in my savings accounts and my investments and things like that. Now I'm at a point now where I base personal success off of freedom. Like, can I come to South by Southwest and not, and be okay, right? Can I travel and be okay, right? Freedom, the flexibility to travel and not feel like that I'm unable to do something because of some type of rope or anything like that. And so now I'm in a position where I do feel free. And so on the personal side, I'm happy.
And I know this says a lot about my personality, but I have business KPIs and personal KPIs. But like, what are you learning? How are you growing? How can you make sure that you have that network opportunity, like as an individual? Because I mean, especially with investors, failure is kind of like the new black. Like, it's super cool to have a founder that failed before because then they can persevere. You can learn from that failure, but also say, I failed, and maybe it was my fault, or this decision led us here, but how would you do it? And I think you could do that personally as well.
I know we're coming up on time, but I have to make a comment on that, which is to say, like this idea that like perseverance is something that is so important, so exciting. This panel and panels that will look like us, of founders who look like us, if we're coming from communities and communities that have been historically oppressed, we have been built up to be resilient in our entire lives, just going through the world, right? And I think like this is like the breeding of the hustlers that have the world to gain and nothing to lose, because we know like we'll just do whatever it takes.
Look at you. Nice.
Set myself.
Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Justin. I run a STEM-based nonprofit in New York City, and I came in a little bit late, so I hope this hasn't already been covered by you guys, but what are some specific examples of practical fundraising golden nuggets that you guys have derived from your experience? And maybe if you could analyze them too.
Oh, all right. Yeah. So we have 3 minutes left. So 1 minute per golden nugget. Okay. Let's do it.
Apply for Camelback.
Ooh,
We all came, we didn't know this until the panel came together, but we're all from different years of Camelback Ventures. And earlier we were talking about like working with people that really believe and speak truth to the mission of supporting underrepresented founders. And shout out to Aaron Walker and the community he's building and the amazing organization that Camelback is.
Yeah.
Yes.
My nugget towards fundraising is when you go into the room, don't just start pitching, right? One of the big things that I learned through places like Camelback, 4.0, and Civic Accelerator is that traditionally we'll go into the room as founders and start pitching. What you need to do is make the conversation more about them first. So you open up and say, hey, before I go into my pitch, I would actually like to learn more about you, your organization, what are some of your strategic goals, right? Because when you get them to lay everything out on the table, you now can take a step back and say, okay, now I understand what I do and how that applies to their strategic goals. And that's gonna help make you more successful with fundraising versus throwing all this information at them that they don't care about, right? So that would be my golden nugget.
Your fundraising strategy is almost like a startup within your startup. So I have a plan. We are seed round, but we've raised almost $2 million to date from high net worths. But because I did research on each individual angel and what their portfolio looked like. So don't come, like Evin said, to just start pitching. Learn about them, come prepared, see what they're interested in. Even like, it's kind of stalkerish, but like you have kids this age, do you think they'd be interested in this platform? Be a person with it. But again, with your strategy, I have potentials for our Series A, B, even C round because I believe that we'll get there and I don't want it to be like, oh, I have a growing company and to figure this out. So map it out, almost roadmap like tech scope, and it's going to change along the way, of course.
Thanks for your question. Okay, well, thank you, Xiaohoa. Thank you, Evin. Thank you, Logan. Thank you all for giving up your lunch breaks to spend the time with us. I hope you learned something, and I know I am always inspired by you guys, gals, and so I hope you were too. Thank you.
Thank you.